Philoctetes lives alone in a rocky cave and survives by his bow, a magical yew that corresponds with the godly strength of Heracles, who bestowed it upon him. The bow of Heracles can't miss, so even having been stranded alone for 10 years, Philoctetes is able to survive by hunting birds by bow and arrow. In the Philoctetes of Sophocles, first performed in 409 BC, the bow was stolen from him after the Greeks returned to retrieve the hero 10 years later. This song, which comes just after the bow is taken by deceit, exemplifies Philoctetes' sadness at losing his right to survive. This is lines 1081 to 1094 in the Philoctetes. O hollow of these cavernous rocks, how scorching and bitingly cold you are, and how I'm never to leave you, oh, how sadly fated, but you'll witness me dying here. Oh, ah me, O pitiful dwelling so filled with my pain, what prey will be left for me every day now? From where will I happen upon any hope of food from now on? The doves above, those timid creatures, will yet fly through the whistling wind. No more will I restrain them. And in the Greek, O koilas petras gualon, termon kai pagatodes, hosuk emelon arro talas, leipse nudepota lamoi kai thnes contisonese. O moi. O prelestoton aulion lupas tas apemu talan, tiptau moi to katam marestai. Tu potiteux somai sito numu melos pothen alpiros. Pelei ai danno pto kades oxu tonu dia pneumatos elosin. O katisco. Neoptolemus is here portrayed as a young boy, tasked with convincing Philoctetes to give up his bow. Philoctetes has been stranded on the island of Lemnos for 10 years, and the wound that made the Greeks abandon him still festers. Still, the prophet Helenus back at Troy has admitted to the Greeks, under torture, that in order to win their campaign, they'll indisputably require the master archer and the bow of Heracles that he yields. The clarity of the Greeks' mission to retrieve the bowmaster makes the fairly isolated scenery and action of the Philoctetes striking. Although the play involves remarkably little characters and contemporary forces of the tragic stage, the deliberation and internal turmoil that overcomes Philoctetes and Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, make the tragedy a success, and contributed to its canonization and the 7 plays of Sophocles that have survived to the present day. The conversation is one of the stakes of communality versus individuality. Philoctetes can hardly move and lives in the spare hollow of quote-unquote cavernous rocks with hardly anything at all. All he can do is hang on to survival through the use of the unmissing bow. Just before this, Neoptolemus has experienced several crises of internal deliberation. Consider the stakes. Neoptolemus meeting a king of Greece who is left alone for 10 years and is tasked with deceiving him into giving up his very livelihood. And it's his very innocence and unimpeachable honesty that makes him Odysseus' chosen emissary for the task. But he also stands to give up his own honor and his sense of right and wrong, a task that Odysseus, the master of deception, would have no problem with. Philoctetes debates giving up his right to live in a sort of Platonic weapons argument, and Neoptolemus' debate is whether to follow through on the ritual growing up that means discarding his innocence and convincing the hero. After stealing the bow, Neoptolemus realizes that he has done more than win the Greeks the tool for winning the war. He has also sentenced Philoctetes to death. The implication of lamenting, quote, the doves above, timorous creatures, and the whistling wind, or pelei dano pto kades oxu tonu dia pneumatos, is that this natural hierarchy will soon change. As Philoctetes mentions just a bit further, the birds will soon be the ones preying on him. Philoctetes' exceptionally vulnerable condition is exemplified through the literal and metaphorical imagery of the bow. The bow is both a life-giving tool for survival, but something that also brings death in its absence. As the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus remarked, to toxoi onomon bios, ergon de thanatos. The bow's name is life, but its work is death. Playing on the fact that in the tonal Greek language, bios is life, and bios, with the accent on the omicron, means bow. Sophocles himself plays upon this distinction in lines 931, 933, and 1282 of the play. These are apestere kas ton bion ta toxelon, and ton bion me apeles, ton bion labon apestere kas. You can see the similarity in diction. This is why the tragedy is in construction so simple, but in action so complex. Consider this passage from Hegel, taken from the Philosophie der Geschichte, or the Philosophy of History. As we find such a natural state in existence empirically, so it is also discoverable conceptually. Freedom as an ideal of immediacy and naturalness is not something that's immediate and natural, but rather must be acquired and first won, and this through an unending mediation in the path between knowledge and will. Wissens und des Wollens. The process has been reversed here, and down to a strong, immutable binary. There is no freedom possible for Philoctetes. His wound will never heal, as it's attributable to a godly illness of disputed origin. And we will also never consent to rejoining the work of the Greeks, out of respect for the fact that they abandoned him for 10 years alone. Neoptolemus instinctively recognizes this, and that's why he gives back the bow and eventually decides to bring Philoctetes back to his home in Greece. The knowledge here for Philoctetes is that he will never be a normal person again, or be around other Greeks again if left stranded on the island. The powers of the bow will sustain him, but his will to not give up on his principles defies the logic, or knowledge, that consenting to fulfill his destiny in sacking Troy is inevitably his only escape. He wills the opposite. And Neoptolemus does as well. He wills that his knowledge of the necessary completion of the ritual task set by Odysseus is wrong, and tries to do the opposite in returning the bow that he has stolen. Considering their two wills contrast with knowledge of this inevitability, the play's Deus Machina conclusion is its only way out. Heracles himself appears to mandate that Philoctetes be taken to Troy, healed, and that he'll participate in the glory of sacking the city. The tragedy here is thus an inversion of the historical progression that we see in conflict between will and knowledge in the Hegel. Eventually, something must break. That break is Neoptolemus' owing up to his character and defying the progression of fate, and deciding to bring Philoctetes home instead of taking his bow, and metaphorically, his life. The tragic conclusion of both options being impossible is concretized by the divine intervention of the godlike figure of Heracles. This ending is notable. The tragic effect of the Philoctetes is undeniable as a play. The play, while again quite limited in performative force and traditional action, is nonetheless a highlight of the Sophoclean corpus in all Attic drama. But the placement of the year, 409, tells us about the Athenian attitude of the time. Concerning the Deus Machina, there seems to be no tool better for the resolution of Philoctetes' life, or the life of the independence of Athens. Indeed, this entire artistic system of sincerity for the presentation of human tragedy on stage, other than the deity's appearance. But this is not a reality in the lived world. In the lived world, Athens falls just a few years later. Euripides and Sophocles both die in 406, and never witness the fall of their free state. But the discourse of these values, and the collapsibility of history's progression within the twin bands of fate and human problems, of knowledge and will, is never examined so saliently again after the ending of 5th century tragedy. Tragedy has been spirited away by the Deus. Real life continues its inevitability, and that inevitability breaks with the mythos heard here. When we listen to Philoctetes' lament of the loss of his bow, we can also hear echoes of the lament all Athenians experience of the loss of certitude and lifeline to freedom. This very mode of communication, of intense, deep deliberation on what is right and wrong, and what they need to discover to survive, is no longer a substitute for historical forces, pure, literal forces that will undo this careful system. While not intentionally so, the Philoctetes' enduring impact is that this extract of the 5th century's artistic microcosm as a whole, which Plato and ensuing philosophers obsessed about, is best seen here in the escape necessary at the end of the play. But this microcosm and Plato's perspective on it is a conversation for another time. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more classical content.